Hello and welcome to Ciaran and Gav's Film Club. I'm your host Gav, and this, our first ever episode, is going to be a Last Jedi special, and I can promise it's going to be tastier than the finest cup of Tatooine blue milk. So our film of the week is going to be, of course, Episode 8, The Last Jedi. Our Joy of Six is going to be all about actors who star in The Last Jedi. Our hot topic is going to be whether you can have too much of a good thing, and our film classic is going to be one of the other films in the Star Wars franchise. Now, there have been 10 films theatrically released, so see if you can guess which one we've picked as our classic of the week. So our film of the week is Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi, and to quote Luke Skywalker, this is not going to go the way you think. Okay, so before I want to get into kind of the good bits of the film, the bad bits of the film, and all that sort of thing, just kind of a quick look at the plot. So this follows on straight from the end of The Force Awakens. So we have Rey and Luke together, and he doesn't want to come back with her to the Resistance, and he also really doesn't want to train her to be a Jedi. He just wants her to leave. And on the other side of things, we have the Resistance fleet in these space battles with the First Order, who kind of obviously outnumber them and outgun them and all this sort of stuff. So these two very big things going on. So what did I like about this film? First up, being the age that I am, I really appreciated the fact it's a character-driven piece. The three main characters for me in this film, Kylo Ren, Rey and Luke, just have these fantastic character arcs where they interact with each other and they develop, and it's amazing to see a Star Wars film that is, I mean, it's not totally character driven, of course there are still the big action set pieces, but the character is the key, and that's the important bit of the movie, and I love that, and it's so different, it's so refreshing to see that in this kind of sort of tentpole blockbuster. Speaking of the action scenes, there's two really good ones that kind of bookend the film. We open on this sort of space battle between the First Order and the Resistance, which just looks incredible. It's like, you know, it's just what you want to see really from a Star Wars space battle. And then it ends on this planet which is covered in salt. And so when the Resistance skimmers fly over this planet, they sort of spit up the salt, and it reveals kind of the red of the actual planet underneath the salt, and it just looks incredible. And as they're sort of skimming out, they're fighting against these new, slightly upgraded, slightly redesigned sort of AT-AT kind of walkers that we first saw in Empire, and it just looks beautiful. And again, there's these beautiful shots with the kind of the sun, and it just looks amazing. It's an absolute feast for the eyes. And to be fair, the whole film looks great and it sounds great again. John Williams is back, and what he does really cleverly is he uses these little motifs from the previous films, and they come back, and it's kind of that sort of Proustian rush, that kind of enjoyment of recognition that you get from, oh yeah, I like that bit again. So that's really great. I think the other thing I really liked was the fact that Star Wars, the first one, was heavily influenced by kind of these World War II dogfighting movies, whereas this, for a large bit of the film, we have the Resistance fleet are travelling away, the First Order fleet are catching them, and the Resistance fleet are kind of, you know, they're running out of fuel and they're being caught, and it felt like one of those World War II kind of naval battle films, something like Battle of River Plate or something like that. And it's kind of great. It's that kind of it's kind of similar to what we saw before, but it's sufficiently different, and you get these bits of kind of not much happening. So you get the captains on the bridge going, "Oh, we're catching them up, sir," and they're catching us up, and then when one of them, you know, does run out of fuel and they gets caught and just gets shot to pieces, it's really good, and it's really a good way of kind of building the tension. However, if I want to talk about what I didn't like about this film is, A, it's too long. No Star Wars film needs to be 2.5 hours. These films are supposed to be family-friendly action-adventure films, so it does not need to be that long. And the middle bit really sags. Really, really sags. So Finn and a new character, Rose, are sent off on this mission to go and find this code breaker so they can get on to one of the Imperial ships and they can destroy their tracking devices so that they can actually properly escape. Unfortunately, it really takes away all this tension that's been building as the sort of the bad guys are catching, and then you go back to Finn and Rose, who are on this casino planet, and it's like, oh, this just feels really out of place. And it's a shame because there's this really interesting kernel of an idea in there that they go to this casino planet that is populated by people who have made their money from selling weapons. So what we see is we see the rich, living the high life. They're fine. They're unaffected by the war, while people are dying and suffering because of the weapons that they've sold. And I find that really interesting. That's a really good idea. And also this bit of just seeing what's happening on other planets while this kind of big war's going on. Actually, how does this impact the rest of the galaxy? And so that's a really interesting idea. But it was kind of one idea too many in this film. And it kind of follows this really pointless cameo of Maz Kanata, who was in The Force Awakens, who they kind of video call. And it's kind of like, again, it's just, that felt really forced in. And the bit with Finn and Rose just felt really out of place. The other thing I didn't really like is Laura Dern's in this film. I think Laura Dern's a great actor, but she's underwritten in this film. It feels like her character exists solely to help Oscar Isaac, Poe Dameron, his character sort of development. And he has some great character development. He goes from being, the fly boy who'll give anything to win the battle, to realising that that's not how you win the war, and that's not how you play the long game. And that's a really interesting development for his character, and I really liked that. But it just felt they had this character, you got a great actor in to play it, who suddenly comes out of nowhere, who's like said to be this great, person and leader and stuff, and no one's really mentioned her ever before. And yeah, it just feels like she's only there to kind of push along his character, which is a little bit sad. And I think the other thing that I didn't like about this film, finally, was with Star Wars. I always think, would I have enjoyed this as an 8-year-old? Because I go into Star Wars when I was a kid. I adore Star Wars, and it was kind of, they were the films when I grew up. They were kind of the films that I always went to the point of. I've got a VHS of Star Wars, the first one, taped off the telly, that I watched so many times. Not only do I know most of the words in the film, I know where all the advert breaks are, and I know most of the words in the adverts. So I love Star Wars. But for me, this film, and like I say, there's some great action scenes in this that I would have really enjoyed, but I think a lot of the character stuff would have gone a little bit over my head. And it doesn't feel the same as The Force Awakens. And I know some people say that's great because they thought The Force Awakens was essentially a retread, but The Force Awakens for me felt like a Star Wars film. It was fun, it was a family-friendly action adventure film set in space, and this feels a bit like it's got some of those elements, but the main bit of it is this character thing. So as an adult, I love it, but I think the 8-year-old version of me would not have loved it as much as he loved the original trilogy. So if I had to give this a mark out of 5 blue lightsabers, I'm not quite sure what I'd give it. It's not quite a 4 out of 5, but it's definitely better than the 3.5. I think it's somewhere around there. Again, and that's purely because 8-year-old me wouldn't have been as keen as I am now at my age, which I'm not going to give away. Right, so that was our main review of the film, and now we're going to talk about some spoilers. So if you've not seen Star Wars The Last Jedi yet, switch off now. This bit's not for you. If you have seen it, or if you haven't seen it and you don't care about spoilers, stick around. So, first off, character deaths and characters who don't die. So, the first one, the big one, is that Luke died. So Luke dies at the end of the film. He hasn't used the Force for a lot of years, but he puts all his energy and all his effort and all of his life force into this big intervention so that his sister Leia and the rest of the Resistance can escape, and the effort sadly kills him at the end of the film. And like I say, Luke has a great story arc in this film. I think it's really fantastic. What I especially loved with the parallels between Luke as a character wanting to get away from the legend of Luke Skywalker, and kind of Mark Hamill as an actor, because in 1983, after Return of the Jedi, he's one of the biggest actors in the world. He never really blew up in the way he should have done. Unlike Harrison Ford, he went on to do quite a lot of stuff. So Luke dies, which feels like part of my childhood died, but also it felt like he didn't just die for the sake of dying. It felt like it had a reason. In the same way that Han Solo, that felt like it had a reason, so I'm fine with it, even though, right, I'm fine with it. However, Princess Leia does not die. So it looks like early on in this film, so the bridge gets attacked, she's on the bridge, loads of people are thrown out into space, Admiral Akbar gets killed, which I wouldn't have cared, but they brought him back in The Force Awakens. They kind of made a big thing about the fact he was in The Force Awakens. If they'd killed him off between Jedi and Force Awakens, I wouldn't have minded. If they'd never mentioned him, fine. But the fact they brought him back just to kill him off in the first 10 minutes of this film just felt a bit odd. But at the same time, it looks like Leia's going to die, but she uses the Force to sort of get back, to fly back through space and get back to safety. And I kind of get it. I get they didn't want to sort of rubbish her memory by cutting any of her scenes out, because obviously after Carrie Fisher sadly died after her filming was complete. But I don't want them to just make it a line in the next film that says she died off screen. Again, however that character is written out, I want it to mean something, and I want it to, feel like it makes logical sense within the story. The other big death that we see in this film is Commander Snoke. So after the first one, after Force Awakens, a lot of people were talking about this guy online, saying, who is he, where's he from, is he a clone of the Emperor, is he some Sith Lord that was in the extended universe of books that came out in the 80s and the 90s, and it felt like we might learn a bit more about him, because actually we get to see him in this one. He's not just a holographic projection, he's actually in the film, but he gets killed, and that's fine. It's a great death. It leads on to this really cool fight scene where Rey and Kylo fight all these Imperial guards, the dudes in red, and it's great little scene, and his death is fine, but the fact we didn't really go into who he was or where he was from or how he got to power and all that sort of stuff, on one hand I'm like, that seems a bit odd, but on the other hand, actually, when we drop in to Star Wars, we never find out how the Emperor got into power, and that story of how he got into power turned out to be really, really boring. So maybe it's for the best we didn't get to find out. And obviously the other big spoiler, the other big sort of thing that's revealed is Rey's heritage. So lots of people are talking, where's Rey from? Is she a Skywalker? Is she a Solo? Is she going to be a Kenobi? And Kylo Ren tells her that actually her parents were nobodies, they were just scavengers on Jakku. And it's kind of, I kind of like that, because I didn't want her just to be another Skywalker or just be another member of a family of someone we'd seen before. That whole thing in the first one where you think that kind of Luke is just a farmer who just happens to have the Force, it's kind of great, because you think, maybe anyone can have the Force, and I kind of like that. But also I'm aware that in these films people lie. So Obi-Wan lies to Luke about his parents, maybe Kylo is lying to Rey about her parents, and maybe we'll find out in the next film. And I don't know where that film's going to go, because Rian Johnson has really left his mark on this franchise. He's done a brilliant job. He has made a film where everyone I know that came out of the screening we went to was just sat around afterwards saying, where's it going to go next? Where can they go next? Where can they take it? And I think that is such an achievement in an age where, especially from Disney, from Marvel, we see so many films that just feel like placeholders for the next one. It's kind of all the characters survive and they're all pretty much the same, ready for the next film, whereas this feels like actually people have died, people have changed, their characters have changed emotionally, they've been through things and they've changed, and I think that's great, and I can't wait to see how J.J. Abrams picks up some of these threads and takes them into episode 9. Okay, so this is our Joy of 6, and the way this works is that every week we have a different theme, and we choose 6 films that relate to that theme. So basically, this is going to be a listicle in video form. And this week's theme is going to be actors in The Last Jedi and films they've previously starred in. So this is not going to be a definitive list. This is not the 6 best films or the 6 greatest movies that these actors have starred in. These are 6 films that actors who are in The Last Jedi have starred in that I personally think are great films. And I've also discounted any of the previous Star Wars films, so there won't be any of those in this list. So number 6, we have Adrian Edmondson in Guest House Paradiso. So in The Last Jedi, Aid Edmondson plays a First Order naval officer, or whatever the equivalent of naval officer is in space. Fleet officer, maybe? But in Guest House Paradiso, we have essentially, it's the bottom movie. It's not quite as tight or as good as kind of the TV series was, but it's still full of the sort of the classic slapstick, violent humour that you come to expect from Aid Edmondson and Rick Mayall. And it's definitely worth a watch. I think, like a lot of those British sitcoms that go onto the big screen, struggles to quite make a full film, but there's enough in this film to definitely warrant giving it a view. So in at 5 we have a 2-for-1. We have Adam Driver and Oscar Isaac starring in Inside Llewyn Davis, and of course Oscar Isaac starring as the titular character, Llewyn Davis himself. So this is kind of a fictionalized sort of account of that whole sort of Bob Dylan going to New York in the early 60s to make it as a folk singer, that whole sort of scene. It's written and directed by the Coen brothers. It's not their best film, but it's still really entertaining, and the soundtrack is absolutely magnificent. In at number 4, the one and only Laura Dern in Jurassic Park. Now, sadly, Laura Dern's character in The Last Jedi is criminally underwritten, but she is amazing in this tale of cloned dinosaurs running amok. I mean, who other than Jeff Goldblum could have ever predicted that would happen, right? Just one quick sort of personal anecdote from this. I remember the summer this came out back in 1993, and it's one of those films that everyone was talking about on the first day back at school because everyone had seen it. And there was one scene in particular that people were talking about when the guy gets eaten by the T-Rex when he's sat on the toilet, which I think shows kind of what sort of age we were. That was our kind of humour. But I think it's a little bit sad now that we don't really have that communal thing anymore. There's very few blockbusters anymore where everyone goes to see it. And also, I guess it shows my age because we lived in a time before communications, because these days people will be WhatsApping that 5 seconds after they'd seen the scene. M8, did you see that T-Rex eat the guy? Lols, etc, etc. At number 3, we have John Boyega in Attack the Block. Yes, rebellious stormtrooper Finn stars as a hooligan in a London tower block that is suddenly invaded by aliens. This is the first thing I ever saw John Boyega in, and he's absolutely brilliant in it. He's pretty much the lead character, even though it's kind of an ensemble piece. What is great about this film is normally when aliens invade Earth, they invade America. It's normally New York, or or at least kind of San Francisco, LA, somewhere like that. And this is kind of great because aliens come to London, and they come to a tower block in London, and all the people who live in this tower block, all these different kind of people, all sort of gang up and basically get together, put their differences aside, and to beat down on the aliens, which I think is just it's just a great film. It's funny, and it's a lovely little film. Number 2, we have the Princess of Our Hearts, Carrie Fisher, starring in The Blues Brothers. It's quite a small role. She plays Jake Blues' estranged wife, who spends most of the film chasing him around and trying to kill him either with a bazooka or an M16. Fortunately for Jake, she's unsuccessful. But this is a fantastic film. It's essentially a musical, but if you like kind of blues or early rock and roll, it's all that kind of music, and it's so well done. It's genuinely funny. John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd as the two main characters. The Brothers are just perfectly cast. Their backing band was essentially the Stax House Band, so the music's going to be great. and I would say that this is probably the pick of the kind of 1980s kind of cult sort of films. And at number 1 we have Domhnall Gleeson starring in Frank, the slightly fictionalised version of the life of Frank Sidebottom. So if you don't know who Frank Sidebottom was, he was a musician who performed wearing a paper mache head. And if that sounds odd in 2017, it was odd all through his career. It was just a bit unusual seeing a guy coming out wearing a paper mache head. And Domhnall Gleeson essentially plays the John Ronson role, so the journalist John Ronson, who played keyboards in Frank Sidebottom's band for a long time and actually wrote the screenplay for this. Unfortunately, because it's a fictionalised account of the band, it kind of misses out on what I think is their career highlights. So they got the opportunity to support Bros in the 1980s at Wembley Stadium. So Bros at the time were absolutely massive. So we are talking probably 40,000 fans, maybe more. This is your big chance. This is, you go out, you play your best songs, and you make some new fans, and then from there your career soars, and fame, money, and whatever else you might want. Instead, what they decide to do is they go out and they play covers of Bros songs on a really little sort of Casio keyboard, and it's dreadful, and the Bros fans do not like this, and they essentially bottle them off after like 5 minutes. But I still kind of love that. I love that situationist prank, that sort of thing of doing the unexpected. I think it's absolutely fantastic. But as for the film is very good. Like I say, Domhnall Gleeson is one of the main supporting characters. Frank himself is played by the amazing Michael Fassbender. So you've got this brilliant actor who is a gorgeous man. He's a really beautiful man, and he spends 95% of the film wearing a paper mache head, so you can't see him. But his acting, the way he moves and the way he sells it through his body language, is one of the best acting performances I have seen in British cinema in the last 10 years. It's how he does it is unbelievable. Acting without being able to use your face, and because he's essentially got a sort of a talk box sort of thing in the head, all of his speech is very kind of monotone. So being able to act with kind of just the rest of your body, incredible skill. Brilliant film. Definitely make sure you check that out. Okay, now it's time for this week's hot topic. Can you have too much of a good thing? Now, Star Wars The Last Jedi was the third Star Wars film we've had in 3 years. Now, bear in mind, sort of back in the 80s, between kind of Jedi coming out and the terrible prequels happening, we had a gap of around 16 years between the terrible prequels ending and Force Awakens coming out. We had a gap of around 10 years. We now, and for the foreseeable future, will be getting a new Star Wars film every single year. But is that a good thing? How can Disney keep up the quality of these films? How can they ensure that all these films are suitably different? I think one of the really great things they did with Rogue One was it feels a lot different to kind of the main sort of Star Wars films, the main kind of sort of Skywalker sort of arc, and I think that's great. It feels a lot more like it's more of a grown-up film. It's like a proper out-and-out war film. And so how can they ensure they keep doing that, especially when you hear all the rumours of the kind of upsets and whatever on set of the new Han Solo film, which comes out next year. So they hired the 2 directors of the Lego movie to come in and do this film, and they should have known what they were going to get from these guys. These guys make films that are going to be broadly comedy. It's going to be a lot of improvisation. That's how these guys work. And if you want them to come in and make your film, then that's how they're going to do it, because that's how they make films. And when that doesn't quite work out for you, when that doesn't quite tick all of your boxes, you sack them and replace them with Ron Howard. Now, I'm not saying that Ron Howard is necessarily a studio yes man, but I can't imagine he's going to do necessarily anything crazy out of the box. It's going to be very much the movie that Disney want to release. And while I think that in terms of casting, which they've got spot on for Solo, really looking forward to seeing it, but I'm a bit worried that it's just going to be a little bit sort of bland and a little bit kind of very sort of, you know, sort of straight ahead and vanilla. Similarly with actually Rogue One, there was a lot of rumours about unrest on the set there, and there were a lot of reshoots. So if you look at the first trailer of that film and compare it to the actual film, there's a lot of footage in the trailer that never made it into the film, and you have to ask, what was the original vision for that film? Where did the director Gareth Edwards want to take it? And again, if you get these people in because of what they've done and because of their visions, you have to let them go with it. And I think that that's the worry for me, that Disney will just kind of make these very homogenized films year on year on year that continue to like gross over $1 billion, so they're quite happy to keep making them. But there's got to be some semblance of interest and art and differentiation. So, you know, like I say, growing up, there were never any new Star Wars films. It just didn't happen, and now they're happening all the time, and part of me is really excited about that. But at some point, you are going to run out of interesting stories and interesting characters and interesting ways to tell those stories about those characters. And then what do? Because you kind of lock yourself into this financial dependence on, oh well, actually, you know, we're making $1 billion, $1.5 billion every year off Star Wars, and that's what means we can make these other films, and that's what means we can employ all these people. And actually, you get to a point where you end up making films that aren't necessarily as good. And I think we've seen a little bit of it in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where, again, also owned by Disney, where the quality is just kind of just nosing off a little bit in terms of they all just feel like part of this massive thing, which don't get me wrong, that's the point out in a cinematic universe, but none of them really push the characters forward, none of them really push any kind of important sort of plot forward. It's all just kind of like, oh, we just sent it for the next thing. So we just, you know, it was like, oh, we just sent it for Avengers, we just sent it for Civil War, we just sent it for Infinity War, we just sent it for this next thing. It's like, well, when are we actually going to get somewhere and then something happen and then people have to deal with it? And at least with Star Wars, I guess they don't have the problem of trying to do 3 films a year. So hopefully, with them being able to focus on a single film every year, the quality will stay high. And for me, if they keep making good films, I'm all for it. That's great. You know, if it is a good thing, I don't think you can have too much of a good thing. But if the quality starts to drop, then you've got big problems. Because, you know, these films, if they're not good, even though you will still make the money, people will still go and see them. From my perspective, you just have to ask, you know, can you go home and look at yourself in the mirror and say, did we do a good job on that? Was that worthwhile making it, even if it made $1 billion? That is the challenge for the execs at Disney. So our classic of the week has to be Empire Strikes Back. So Empire Strikes Back, in my opinion, by far away the best of the Star Wars films, and we have had 8 in the main kind of story now. We've had Rogue One, and there were 2 Ewok films that came out in the 80s. They were terrible, so we don't talk about those. But Empire for me is the pick. It really benefits from being the second film because we've already met all these characters. We don't need to be introduced to them. We kind of drop straight in. We know who they are. We know what they're all about. And then we just see them go through all these adventures. And what I love about this film is that it's really action-packed. So if you stop and think about this film, you know, you've got the attack on Hoth to start with, followed by the chase through the sort of, you know, asteroid belt, followed by you know, Luke training on Dagobah with Yoda. You've got Han and Leia arrive at Bespin and they get captured by Vader. Luke arrives, finds out Vader's his dad, spoiler alert, and then, you know, Luke escapes and they get away. So there's all these brilliant sort of action set pieces, but it's also an amazing sort of character development. You know, we've got Han and Leia's relationship blossoms, and, you know, they have that, you know, the lovely cheesy moment of I love you, I know, when he's getting frozen in carbonite. You know, we have Luke having to make these really tough decisions about whether to stay training with Yoda or whether to go and try and help his friends. and you know, feels like there is genuine character development as well as amazing action scenes. The other thing I really love is the bit with Luke and Yoda on Dagobah, where he is learning the ways of the Force, because they do this brilliant thing that so much TV does really well. So Doctor Who does it really well, Rick and Morty does it really well, where you have one character who doesn't really know much and one character who's an absolute expert, and because the expert is telling the sort of novice everything about it, we as the audience learn everything about it. So we learn that, you know, we are not this crude matter. We learn that the Force, you know, penetrates us, and we learn all about how it works. We learn that war does not make one great. We learn all these great things that Yoda teaches Luke, and because he's taught Luke, we as the audience learn, which is fantastic, and that works so well. And again, there's just so many sort of brilliant sort of visual treats in this film. You know, it looks incredible. You know, that the sort of the attack on Hoth, you know, making that sort of scene in the sort of early 80s, when, you know, visual effects were you know, there's no computers, it's all practical effects, but it's very hard to do kind of blue or green screen when you're trying to do it against snow. But it looks incredible. It looks absolutely amazing, and it still stands up today in terms of the quality of the effects. Yeah, it's just a great film. I think the saddest thing is the fact that this is the one that George Lucas kind of had the least input into. Which, bearing in mind, this is a guy who created the entire universe, the entire mythos, all the characters, and actually, it's almost like it needed someone else to kind of go and play with those to make it work and make it, you know, really properly stick together. And that's not to say the first Star Wars film is excellent, but then obviously when Lucas comes back for more involved in Jedi, we see a lot more things that could be turned into toys, where there's not really anything in this. You know, you look at something like even like Last Jedi has the Porgs in, where you're thinking, they're great, they're funny little comic relief characters, but also you're going to sell so many of those when it comes to Christmas. Fair play, it's hard to argue with that. And I think that's the thing. If you look at Empire compared to something like The Last Jedi, and obviously they're both the second films in their respective trilogies, they're both you know, sort of darker than the original one. You've got these characters who are going through sort of desperate times and how they cope with it and how they grow. And as I've said on our review of The Last Jedi, it's great because it's a character piece. But Empire's a character piece and still has all the action going on around it that mean, you know, actually, if you are an 8-year-old watching this, you can still adore this film for just the action, the fun, you know, the fun bit. You know, it's almost like, actually, you might not get the full impact and realization when you discover that Darth is Luke's dad, but you know, you can still enjoy that sort of scene where they're fighting, where Darth is really just kind of, he's completely in control and he's just toying with Luke, and you know, Luke's, you know, it's really the first time Luke's used a lightsaber, so you know, he's doing pretty well to not die, and that's absolutely fantastic. And I think that's the other thing about this film, is it's so, and this is pretty true of all the Star Wars films, to be honest, it's so permeated into popular culture that I know people who hadn't seen Star Wars, I know people who hadn't seen Star Wars until relatively recently, but they all knew that Darth Vader is Luke's dad. And on one hand, it's great that, you know, Star Wars is so such a touchstone. On the other hand, it's really sad that it's going to be really difficult for people to go into that film and find that out for the first time. And I'm aware that I've kind of talked about it, and I've not put any spoiler warnings on this video, so I do apologise if you've not seen Empire yet and you didn't know the relationship, and yeah, I feel like I've just shot Bambi. But anyway, yeah, Empire Strikes Back is basically everything I ever wanted in a Star Wars film. It's, you know, like I say, it looks great, it sounds great, it's got so much action in it, but it's also got character and it's got heart. and that is why we have chosen Empire Strikes Back as our classic of the week. So that was episode 1 of Ciaran and Gav's Film Club, and I hope that it hasn't been too much like The Phantom Menace. Please leave us some comments below, and please subscribe to our channel. We're also on all the major social media networks, so please give us a follow, and we'll be back very soon with our next show. Thank you all for watching.